Hi, Meltem.
Hey, Meltem. Not at all creepy right now. Hey, all. I am Sam Ewen from CoinDesk. Really excited to have this conversation. I wanted to frame the conversation with a bit of an introduction story. Raise your hand if you remember Tropicana Gate from 2009. All right, 2 people. So in 2009, Tropicana Orange Juice made a big mistake, which was they changed their logo on their packaging. An agency called the Arnell Group came in. And what they did was they took the giant orange that had been on the package of Tropicana and they cut it in half because they wanted to say, let's show where the juice comes from. People freaked out. They had to recall all of the packaging because everyone wanted it to be exactly the way they remembered it when they were kids. And I thought it was interesting, just as an analogy, the idea that when you showed what was inside, people got very uncomfortable. Crypto's a little bit like that. So we're going to have a conversation about showing what crypto does, how people feel about that, and then really what are the lessons that we can learn on how to kind of reimagine the brand of crypto. So I'm really excited to talk with Jordan and with Meltem. They both have some, I think, really big insights on how we should address this. The first topic I want to look at with both of you was a stat we talked about in our pre-call, which is 75% of adults who have heard of cryptocurrency are not confident in their safety and reliability. And that's a Pew Research study. So we're 15 years into the modern era of cryptocurrency and digital cash. And yet 75% of the people who hear about it still don't really trust it. So maybe Meltem, I'll start with you. Why do you think that is the challenge right now?
Look at the headlines, look at the stories. I think it's very challenging for people to still engage with crypto. I've been in this industry professionally for almost a decade now, which in any other industry would be, not a very long time, but in this industry, it's a very long time. I like to joke, I feel like crypto grandma sometimes. And if we look at the narratives, right, from when I started professionally in the industry, the story of Mt. Gox, a material percentage of all of the Bitcoin in circulation was involved in that. And then we look at what's happened throughout the years. There have been just a string of very high profile failures and hacks of both centralized platforms, as well as in the last few years, we had the promise of DeFi and moving on chains, your own keys, your own coins. But we have had issues with some of this new technology, some of the bridges being built, some of the L2, some of these DeFi protocols that allow people to use their crypto in a non-custodial manner. There have been vulnerabilities that have been exploited there as well. So I think if we look at the narrative, if we look at the headlines, if we look at the experiences many people have had, regardless of whether they are on sort of the novice end of the spectrum and engaging with crypto through a centralized intermediary that's more akin to how they might be accustomed to interacting with a financial services provider, all the way through the more cypherpunk element, right? Most famously, in the last few months, a Bitcoin core developer had issues with the safety of their Bitcoin in their own custody. There have just been this string of highly reported, highly sensationalized failures that I think sometimes are difficult to defend. Some of them are technological in the sense that there are edge cases or flaws or dependencies within the way smart contracts are constructed that allow for exploitation of those flaws or vulnerabilities. But others have been operating error, famous cases of greed as well, outright theft, simply a lack of responsibility. And so it's very challenging, I think, for me sometimes to articulate to people from outside the industry, people who have not yet been orange-pilled, as we like to say, or who are not yet fully bought in
to the promise of crypto, sometimes it can be very difficult in light of these headlines, in light of these very sensational stories, to sort of defend the industry or to make people feel that this is in fact, an industry and an asset class that they can trust and they can feel secure in interacting with. So that is, I think, unfortunately, a big challenge.
So Jordan, do you believe that crypto has a branding problem? And as Stellar, how do you try to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think crypto specifically does have a branding problem. And I think the way that we at STF think about it is, I mean, even as I talk to people outside the industry, I actually will even differentiate between sort of crypto and blockchain, right? And obviously those things are heavily interrelated. But for us, I think crypto, what Meltem said, I think is exactly right. All the sensationalist headlines, the big price swings that all of a sudden CNBC suddenly starts getting interested in Bitcoin pricing because it's gone up and down and up and down. I think for us, we really try to, I mean, we have a tagline of where Stellar's where blockchain meets the real world. Where are the real use cases that blockchain is being used? It's less about the cryptocurrency itself than it is about how is blockchain enabling something to be better or different. But it is an uphill climb, and the best example I have of that is, last December, we were ready to talk about Stellar 8 Assist, which is a system, a collection of tools we have that lets humanitarian organizations use blockchain to dispense humanitarian aid. Something the UNHCR was tremendous. They're getting ready to pilot that in the Ukraine, and we take out a full-page ad in the New York Times, and we're excited. This is going to be blockchain is doing something, and it's the day that SBF is getting arraigned in New York City, right? And so, what if you're a mainstream media outlet? What are you going to write about? You're going to write about, hey, look what the UNHCR is trying to do, or you're going to write about, hey, this guy who just bilked everybody out of all their money is actually, look, here he is going to jail, right? And so that makes it tough. But I think for us, what we hammer really hard is about the utility of blockchain. And I think part of the industry's challenge is a lot of and I know we're going to talk more about this, the focus on speculation sort of feeds that flame, right? And I understand it, and I talk about one of the hardest parts of my job is I have a range of different audiences that I'm talking to about Stellar, and we love all our children, but the kind of undercurrent of speculation focus makes a lot of that really challenging.
And I think that's one of the challenges we, even in the media, both deal with and probably are guilty of, in the sense that it's very easy to write the story of Madonna buying a Bored Ape, or a fraud or a scam that happens, or even what's supposed to be an innovative release. It's hard to write the true stories of how we're tokenizing real world assets, or how we're bringing underserved communities into financial tools that may transform their lives, because those are just less sexy stories from a media perspective. But I do think we have to continue to tell those stories. Meltem, what's your recommendation for how to tell stories that people will understand, will drive the sort of adoption they crave, but not necessarily through the speculative stories and speculative projects?
I think this is a great question, and one, I've invested in over 250 companies. The big question is, how do we tell a story that isn't number go up, right? And so I think that the challenge here is, number one, just where we are in terms of what's being built in the crypto space. We are still in the infrastructure phase, unfortunately. And a lot of the narrative, a lot of the, and I'd love to hear, Jordan, your thoughts on this, a lot of the marketing copy that I get, especially from teams who are trying to build awareness around the infrastructure and tooling they're building, is technical features or differentiation based on technical parameters. One that I think has just become a meme is transactions per second, right? Like every blockchain is oh, X transactions, like that's lovely. There are no transactions on your chain because there are no products that people can interact with. So that's a lovely statistic. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares because nobody's using it, right? So I think the bigger question I ask is, what are the actual products and services that I can interact with that are not just developer infrastructure, developer tooling, core technical architecture? And number one. And then number two, I think the big question is, how do we quantify and qualify where and how what we've built is doing things better, easier, cheaper, faster, whatever the metric is, like show me the numbers. And again, I think the hard part is, number one, it's really hard to quantify and qualify things that are happening on chain because a wallet does not equal a user. So the data I have is the number of wallets. Well, wallets does not equate users, so I can't easily say, okay, there are 300 million Bitcoin wallets, which means there are 300 million users of Bitcoin. So there's also this sort of translation challenge. I think there are a number of firms that are doing a good job trying to translate and trying to quantify and qualify. But at the end of the day, until we get to a point where people are actually building products that are widely utilized, where we can point to actual underlying empirical evidence that we can verify on chain or off chain, right? We need more publicly listed companies publishing data, like Coinbase being public, having data. My firm Coinshares being public, having and publishing data, I think is an important first step. I'd love to see more centralized crypto companies going public so we have that added transparency, more insights into some of these usage numbers. But on chain, right, all of this is public domain. So the more we can quantify and qualify, I think the more it really helps people understand, okay, there are actually people using this technology. Here are the unique ways in which it's being used. And here is what that's facilitating. And we can sort of contextualize, okay, compared to the volume that goes through a PayPal or a Visa. It's one of my favorite stats about stable coins is there's actually a lot of transactional volume, and stable coins in many ways are starting to sort of reach the size and scale in terms of utilization that some payment networks are. So I think the quantifying and qualifying is incredibly important.
One of the things we talked about in our pre-call was, we lived in a long time in crypto where anyone who was challenging the narrative of this is going to be transformational and change the world was often sort of relegated to, oh, you just have FUD, right, over here. And in our call, we were talking about the company Recur. And Recur is a company that raised $50 million in 2021. They had partnerships with everyone from Hello Kitty to Paramount and Star Trek. They had minted over 380,000 NFTs on blockchain, and they just announced they were shutting down. So in 2 years, going through $50 million with the biggest licensing opportunities one could have, and hundreds of thousands of product out there. And it made me really think, where were their VCs, and where were their advisors, and where were the chains they were working with, and where were the people who were saying to them, no, we have to build companies that can be long-term thinking, that are sort of willing to do what it takes to build a brand long-term versus the speculation a lot of us have. Recur had their own pass that at one point someone spent $88,000 on one of them, because they thought this fantastical, magic item was going to drop from it. And so, Jordan, I'll start with you. As you guys work with tons of entrepreneurs who are coming up, who all would love to be the next X, right? How do you sort of keep them grounded to say it actually hurts us when you don't succeed? We know not all of you will, but we're going to help train you for the best effort to do the best job.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. I mean, look, I work in marketing. I could spend $50 million. I don't think I could spend it that quickly, that inefficiently. I think when we talk with companies in the Stellar ecosystem, and for example, we have a program, we give out marketing grants. So companies they've built something, they're ready, it's ready to launch, and they want to check out something like product market fit. Or, hey, we're going to start to, we want to throw some gas on the fire to see. And frankly, we used to get marketing grant requests, and the numbers were astronomical. And, the reality is, the companies probably couldn't even figure out how to spend that kind of money that quickly. And I think what we have really, I don't want to say trained, but we've become really rigorous on is, look, first of all, let's stair step this, right? Let's start with this, 6 months, let's see how it goes. And these are the metrics that we agree upon with an ecosystem company. This is what we're aiming for, right? And these are the things we're going to do, and we're going to check in, and there's a little bit more hand-holding along that. And frankly, the companies we talk with, they welcome that, right? They want kind of like, they kind of want to be walked along and get feedback and iterate on a plan and what's working and what's not, as opposed to, hey, it's here, we're going to turn the fire hose on and light the world up. Instead, it's like, look, these are the metrics that matter. These are the things that are ultimately going to, if we are able to move these metrics, turn us into a sustainable enterprise over time, right? So we'll give out marketing grants, but we're not going to fund companies' marketing in perpetuity. And so it's like, show us that you can get to kind of the crawl, walk, run, and then when you're ready to run, great, and then we can support you in other ways. But it's not, I think, 2 years ago, there was so much money falling from the sky, kind of an expectation of blank checks and blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, okay, well, that clearly doesn't get you to the right place. So let's agree on the business fundamentals that matter for your business, and we'll help you get there and see how it goes.
Meltem, what's your advice to a founder to say, hey, the raise is only the beginning of your journey, and how do you do that with integrity and build something to last?
I mean, Jordan, I wish money was falling out of the sky. Unfortunately, money was falling out of LPs' bank accounts, and that money has to get returned, right? And the idea is, a venture capitalist gets risk capital to deploy, to invest, and grows that capital and returns it. So I think over the next few years, there will be some tough questions asked by LPs who have invested, allocated to crypto and venture in particular, because I think there was a lot of money spent. So I think one important thing to say, and I'm shocked we haven't brought up the word, incentives really matter. And Jordan, you allude to it a little bit with the grant program. I think grants especially, we have seen, unfortunately, in some organizations, that the grant giving process has been challenging, just because when you give a grant, sometimes there isn't the same level of accountability or the same incentives you might have if a venture capitalist is deploying an LP's capital as a fiduciary. But I think if we look at the incentives, Sam, it's just really important to think about, like, what have been the incentives for the last few years? The crypto casino, right, needs it. It needs news, it needs headlines. And one of the things, it's so interesting how founder attitudes have shifted. Maybe 2 years ago, founders would say to me, I need these blue chip investors, I need to raise a lot of money because that's how I get attention. And being well funded and having a lot of capital was the differentiator, particularly I think for L1 chains and sort of other longer term projects where maybe doing growth-based or metrics raises that typically you'd see in an equity-focused company would be typical. I think with protocols, because of the speculative nature and the liquidity unlock of a token, I think it sort of skewed the incentives a bit, and maybe also lowered investors' sort of expectations around diligence, because how do you diligence the propensity of a protocol's token to succeed? So it's just a little bit of a different world, but I do think the incentives really matter. Now the incentives have shifted. And I think the question for everyone is, what I've been telling people is, look, I don't expect the venture ecosystem, the capital is gonna be really available readily for the next 18 to 24 months. And that's a long timeline. I do think just venture as an overall asset class is suffering from a major hangover of the last decade, really, in a zero interest rate environment where, venture has been one of the few attractive places to put capital. There's been, just investments at insane valuations that are not at all comparable to what you're seeing in public markets and what might be possible from an exit liquidity perspective, right? So investing in a company at 100x forward multiple of revenue that was something that was done in 2021, I think now you'll struggle to see those investments happening, particularly at the growth stages. But I think again, I don't think we're at the phase quite yet where reality has set in, because there is still dry powder being deployed in the crypto space. I do think it's harder to raise capital in the later stages. Earlier stage, obviously, fewer metrics. There's more optimism, I think, around what can be achieved. But I think the reality is we simply aren't seeing, the multi-$100 million raises that we were maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, because again, I think there is increased skepticism. I think we've seen a lot of poor fiduciary responsibility with the capital that's been raised. And so the incentives, I think the incentives are starting to shift a bit. But the question is really, how do you get to a point where you build something people want to use, whether it's product or infrastructure? I think I joked on our pre-call, I really like furniture. I like very impractical, like weird design. But what I sometimes say about all of the quote unquote infrastructure we're building in this space is like, we're building a bunch of really expensive chairs that nobody will ever sit in. And just because we can build it from a technical perspective doesn't mean we should sometimes. So, I think my challenge is I look at a lot of ideas, and a lot of these ideas, while they're really novel and interesting, maybe from a technological perspective, they don't serve any particular need or purpose yet. And I don't really see how they could be monetized or commercialized in the future. Doesn't mean it shouldn't exist, but perhaps not everything needs to be venture funded with a valuation that makes my eyes bleed.
Show of hands, how many people here are on Instagram? How many of you joined Instagram to get rich? How many of you have bought a crypto token or an NFT with the idea that you might get rich? I do think that's one of the things we need to think about is, we talk about mass adoption, and then the true applications that have brought mass adoption are not ones that have such financialization built into them. Yeah. That doesn't mean that a Robinhood or an E-Trade didn't do things that had the same ethos in mind, but I think we do have to reshift to focus. I think we talked about this, and Jordan, maybe you want to spend 30 seconds on how do we focus on not token prices, but innovation and technologies that can transform the world for the better.
Yeah, and I think actually some of the, for me, as some of the larger players in financial services start to dip their toe into blockchain functionality, like that to me is a really good indicator, right? So MoneyGram launching a non-custodial wallet, right? The companies that are looking into asset tokenization and that type of, like for major funds, right? Where these companies are seeing like, hey, there's a way that blockchain is doing this better. And I think the value of those companies getting involved is A, you can see they're really focusing on utility, and B, it's a good housekeeping seal of approval, right? So it's as the industry wrestles with branding, when someone like Franklin Templeton starts getting involved, you're kind of like, okay, well, those, that's not a flippant thing that they're doing. And so I think that helps and is sort of can be as a counter to the, oh, everyone's in this just to get rich as fast as possible sort of craze.
All right, my final question for each of you, one word answer, is on the spectrum from like, on the one hand you have Apple and Harley Davidson, and on the other one you have like Spirit Airlines. Where does the crypto brand sit today? Meltem, I'll start with you.
We're Spirit Airlines, baby.
All Spirit. Jordan?
I think it's kind of Spirit with maybe heading a little bit towards kind of the Southwest, where there's the free-for-all of open boarding and everyone just, but it actually can start to turn into a real functional airline that you want to buy a ticket on. And so
you can bring up one bag for free now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Meltem, Jordan, thank you guys so much for spending time with us.
The snacks are good.
Right, exactly.
And thank you guys all for participating with us.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey folks, how are you today? A little tired from yesterday, I'm sure. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tina Caye. I'm the creative director at the SDF, and I am joined by one of our amazing creative partners, the founder of Popcorn Brain, our agency partner in our brand refresh, Diego Molina.
Hi, everybody.
So I want to talk a little bit about leaning in and standing out. That's kind of the way that we approached our brand refresh. You know, how do we lean into those things that make us unique? And then how do we stand out from the crowd as well? And so, Diego, I'd love for you, as an outside perspective from SDF, tell us a little bit about what you think our biggest opportunity was as we went into the brand refresh.
Well, you know, we all know that the word opportunity is a euphemism for what are the big challenges or problems that we're facing. So I think, we did a pretty deep analysis about, you know, what you guys needed, but it boils down to two main ideas. One is that, you know, as the panels before spoke, there is a certain feeling about the crypto industry and the blockchain industry. It has it has a smell to it. So one of the first things we needed to do is make sure that we could stand out of that crowd. You know, we saw that we were becoming part of a mush of similar offerings and similar looking things. That's one end, and the other end is to make sure that there is whatever the team at Stellar is, the real humans that live and work on that project, that spirit is encapsulated correctly. So we call that to lean in and lean into the strengths of the Stellar team.
Yeah, I love that. And something that I found really unique about our process going through this was the concept of ikigai. And I've used that personally, right? It's finding kind of your purpose, but I hadn't used it from a brand perspective. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from you around how you kind of settled on that, how you thought about that, and then where we kind of settled with our values based on that.
Yeah, so I think what is important for our branding process in particular is to really come to terms with the idea that we have to work with the people that we have. We're not going to make a super cool brand suddenly and change everybody into like, okay, change your clothes and your outfit and be cool now. These are the people that we have to do it with. So for us, it's really important to understand what the spirit of the organization is. So through Ikigai, we explore some really important topics. We do the same for every stakeholder in the company. And we explore concepts like, you know, what we love to do and what our purpose is in terms of, you know, what the world needs and what we create value with and what we're good at, you know. What are the technical proficiencies that we have. And with that process and interviewing a bunch of y'all, we boil it down into a few core values, and those core values are on the screen right now. These really help us create rules and ways of bringing the brand to life. So here's a slide that I didn't make. Sorry. Yeah, so it says, we are not like the rest of the industry. The proof is in the pudding. We have a lot of real-world cases and things that we actually do. We need to speak to a broader, more inclusive audience. We focus on the now. We live in the today, so we're not busy with looking at the stars, which is what our previous branding was doing a lot.
Yeah.
But we're looking around us to the real world. And we're here for builders. So that was another thing that we tied down on this branding as well, where before the brand was a little bit all over the place and we didn't really know who we're talking about. Now we really know that we almost want to become a lifestyle brand for the people that are the innovators, the makers, the ones that, you know, don't put on that cape but do change the world with their own superpower, which is creating the next big thing.
That's right, yeah, and I think for me, one of the key takeaways for that was really, Jordan mentioned in the previous panel, our kind of broad array of audiences, right? And I think at the core of that, though, everyone is a human, right? And so bringing Stellar down to earth, as we said, really did kind of lean into each of those individual audiences in a very unique way, but also as a collective. And so I think that that's really been a strong differentiator for us coming out of this brand refresh for sure.
Yeah.
So we've got just a few minutes left, but I'd love to talk a little bit about how we transition transitioned from our ikigai, our values, into actual design, right? Like,
Yeah.
So how do you take this ethereal thing of values and what are we all about and who are we, and turn that into something more tangible?
Yeah, exactly. So we noticed from our fact-finding missions within the organization that there was a thing that we all have in common. That's what Ikigai is about. And the thing that everybody at Stellar has in common is that they really want to be helpful. They really want to be out there to, they put a lot of love in documentation, but they also have to speak to very different audiences that all speak very different languages. So we realized that being helpful is really kind of the core thing that we want to try to do with our visual identity. But we also realized that there's another thing going on with the Stellar team, and that's something I think everybody has noticed, that when we drop a big innovation or we partner up, we don't really say anything much about that, and it just kind of fizzles out. So we realized that you can't really be that helpful if you are invisible. So that's why we really wanted to make sure that we created a brand that stands out of the crowd and really hoists a flag up so people really know where we are and we can be the most helpful that we are. So being helpful, our design ethos is being humble but not invisible. And that led us to inspirations from the world of wayfinding. It led us to inspirations of showing people the way from left to right, people that maybe be not crypto native, and show them the path through to understand and learn, but also being helpful for people that are more native or have high technical knowledge, that they really immediately can get to what they need. So this is a big inspiration for us. But what this lacks is that human touch that's really strong in everything that is Stellar. So that's why we created this brand that has this really, tactile feel. So here is a slide that shows a little bit of the industry, right? And it's pretty hard to actually find the old Stellar in this mix.
We all loved The Matrix, obviously.
The Matrix, everybody loved that stuff. So here we see some events from the DeFi space. Everybody loves this deep purple. So we thought, how to stand out. That's a really easy one. We just find a 180, we just flip that hue clock 180 degrees. And that's how we got to a really beautiful yellow. That is, the most contrasting color to the rest of the space. And that's kind of where, what we want to say with that. And that led to, the beautiful website created by our partners, Côte d'Azur, that has all these elements, the really physical, tactile nature. We have the bold typography that reminds us a little bit of publications. Oh, sorry about that. Let's click that further. And we created this really new brand world. You are only seeing like this is kind of the first big expression of this brand coming to life. But you see the big bold typography, you see the yellow coming to life. And we push that through various different media. So here we have everything from white papers to digital ads. Iconography is super important in the space to explain quite complex concepts. So we created so none of this is made, with AI. It's all handmade by an actual illustrator. And one of the questions I get a lot is, as part of the refresh, we did these really cool PFPs for the team, and everybody's asking me like, how did you guys do that? Did you use AI for that? And we had to tell the truth that in a world where everything is made with AI, the innovation is the human made.
We went the human way. Yeah,
exactly,
for sure.
And the same goes for things like animations, all handmade animations, hand drawn illustrations. When we talk about assets that we use on the site, when it's human centered, we show a lot of photography. So our photography is celebrating the human side of the creation process. So here we celebrate our makers in the space, not by showing them, using perfect ergonomics in their office, but as a creator really makes, in their bed, on their way to work, and whatever they do. So we have this beautiful photography that shows the real life behind the developers. And I think we've run out of time.
We have run out of time, but the good news is, if this interests you and you want to talk more about brand and creative, Diego and I will be back right here tomorrow for our mentorship session. So find it in the app, come sign up and chat with us. We're happy to tell you anything we know and tell you the things we don't. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you guys.